Our top story today, North Korea is threatening to cancel next month's highly anticipated summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un if they believe the negotiations will only drive them into a corner. As CBS's Laura Podesta reports, they've already canceled one high-level meeting today.
North Korea says a one-sided demand by the United States to denuclearize may force it to cancel next month's historic meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. The statement targeted remarks like this one made last month by National Security Advisor John Bolton on CBS's Face the Nation. He said North Korea should quickly dismantle its nuclear arsenal, as Libya did 15 years ago.
But is it a requirement that Kim Jong-un agree to give away those weapons before you give any kind of concession?
I think that's right. I think we're looking at the Libya model of 2003, 2004.
The threat to the summit came just hours after North Korea abruptly canceled a meeting today with South Korean officials. The plan was to discuss the recent agreement between the two countries to reduce military tensions. South Korea's unification ministry called it regrettable. The sudden withdrawal was in response to annual combined South Korean and U.S. military drills, similar to this one conducted last year. The Pentagon calls them routine and purely defensive.
They're exercises that are legal, they're planned well in advance.
The North appeared to show goodwill last week. 3 American detainees were released, and a promise was made to dismantle its nuclear site later this month.
Is the summit still on?
The White House says it's examining North Korea's comments. Laura Podesta, CBS News, New York.
And South Korea said it has no plans to stop the military drills, which last for 2 weeks. Continuing our coverage, the 3 Billings police officers disciplined for having sex on city property are now identified, and 1 resigns. All 3 officers released their own names through letters, and attorneys just 1 day before a court order would have revealed their identities. Q2's Asia Gore has the details.
A Billings police officer with a lengthy disciplinary record was the first to admit Tuesday he had sex with a civilian city employee. Officer Paul LaMantia, a 9-year department veteran, disclosed his involvement in a letter read on a Hot 1019 radio show. An attorney for one of the other 2 officers later told MTM News LaMantia had sex with the woman in the City Hall building while off duty. He said in the letter, quote, "There is no excuse for my impulsive, ill-advised actions, and my decision to do so has caused harm to my family, friends, and department." LaMantia was previously investigated in 2015 for assaulting a Laurel officer, disciplined in 2012 for taking a transient couple to the outskirts of town midwinter, and sued by a man injured by LaMantia during a 2012 foot chase. The Billings city attorney tells us LaMantia officially resigned last week. He declined an interview, but says he is focused on finding employment to support his son. Hours after LaMantia's disclosure, the 2 other officers released their names through their attorneys. Officer Clint Anglin, hired in 2010, and Officer Matt Edwards, employed since 2012, admit to the misconduct. Anglin and Edwards both had sex while on duty, one incident taking place in City Hall, the other in a police car. Those 2 officers indicated in letters to the Big J Show they plan to continue their work with the department and say they're dedicated to regaining the community's trust. In Billings, I'm Asia Gore, MTN News.
The woman the 3 men had sex with was fired from the department earlier this year after she admitted stealing drugs from police evidence. Because the officers volunteered their identities, the judge lifted the seal on the documents and overturned the restraining order against the city. Chief St. John declined to comment. Turning to court news, a former secretary of the Montana High School Rodeo Association is now charged with embezzling more than $38,000. Alicia Lappy is charged with 1 count of theft by embezzlement in Beaverhead County. Lappy started working for the association in March of 2015 and was let go in December of last year. Court documents state Lappy wrote several checks to herself and made several debts to the account without approval. Lappy admitted to authorities she used the checks to pay off 2 separate loans and buy things for her family. Meanwhile, 2 environmental groups and 3 landowners filed suit in federal court to block 287 new oil and gas leases in Montana. The suit alleges the Bureau of Land Management failed to account for potential groundwater contamination and climate change when it leased 150,000 acres of public land in December and March. The leases in question involve more than 98,000 acres in the Tongue River Valley in southeastern Montana. It also includes 46,000 acres near Livingston, the Beartooth Foothills, and public land near the Missouri River Breaks National Monument. By failing to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions that will result from drilling and fracking, the suit alleges the sales are illegal and unaccepted. BLM officials could not be reached for comment by MTN News, but the agency told other media outlets it does not comment on pending litigation. We now know the name of the Helena man who was killed in a crash near Jordan. Authorities in Garfield County say 28-year-old Colby Hurt died in a single vehicle crash Monday night. Hurt's vehicle was eastbound on Highway 200 when it slid off the road and overturned in a ditch. Authorities say Hurt was not wearing a seatbelt and was pronounced dead at the hospital. Sheriff Clay Lammers says it appears Hurt may have fallen asleep at the wheel while driving at a high rate of speed. Lammers says there were no signs of drug or alcohol use. Law enforcement officers from around the state stopped in Deer Lodge Tuesday to remember those who gave their lives for this difficult profession. MTN's John Amy has a story.
The emotional ceremony in Deer Lodge Tuesday reminds those in law enforcement about the harsh reality of their job.
Each one that are in this profession understand that today might be your last day.
The law enforcement memorial service held at the old Montana State Prison commemorated the last day of Broadwater Sheriff's Deputy Mason Moore, who was shot to death during a traffic stop near Three Forks on May 16th of last year. More than 120 officers have been killed in the line of duty in Montana's history.
Montana has a lot of dirt between light bulbs. Your backup is often an hour away. So you learn to be diplomatic, you learn to show a lot of respect, but there are people who don't show respect. There are people who set out to kill us.
Deputy Moore's fellow officers were there to remember their fallen comrade.
He was a great officer. He was a great man. He loved his family. He loved his kids. You know, he was one of those guys who was willing to do anything that he could.
It was just one day after last year's ceremony that Deputy Moore was killed in the line of duty. Now, the men and women of the Broadwater County Sheriff's Department said they got through that traumatic time by standing together.
You know, and we just really rally around each other and make sure that no one's forgotten and that everyone's there. And, you know, that's how we're getting through this. You know, just takes us time, and we're rallying around each other and continuing to go forward.
And appreciating the ultimate price their fellow officers paid. In Deer Lodge, John Amy, MTN News.
Deputy Moore was also honored at the National Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Montana Republican Senator Steve Daines and Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren are reaching across the aisle to fight gambling addiction among service members. Their proposed bill, the Gambling Addiction Prevention Act, would require the Department of Defense to track gambling disorders in its health assessments. The DoD would also develop policies and programs to prevent and treat gambling problems. The National Council on Problem Gambling says an estimated 56,000 active duty service members may meet the criteria for gambling disorder.